The moving truck was still running when a sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind me, and I remember thinking, well, that didn't take long. I'd barely stepped out onto the gravel driveway before this woman in a white cashmere coat came storming down the dock like she owned the lake itself, sunglasses on, phone pressed to her ear, heels clicking against the wood loud enough to turn every curtain in the neighborhood into twitching little eyes. "Yes, officer," she said, not even trying to lower her voice. "That's him, the drifter veteran I warned you about." I just stood there holding a box full of my father's fishing gear while the engine from the moving truck rattled behind me, and the whole shoreline watched like they were about to see somebody get arrested on live television. Funny thing is, 3 months later, that same woman was crying in handcuffs outside the exact same cabin she tried to steal from me. My name's Logan Mercer, and after 21 years in the Army, I honestly thought the hardest days of my life were already behind me. Turns out, some wars don't start until you come home. The cabin sat on Blackwater Lake, tucked between old pine trees and crooked cedar docks that had been there longer than most of the fancy houses crowding the shoreline now. My father built that place in 1971 after coming home from Vietnam with a bad knee, 2 duffel bags, and enough nightmares to keep him awake for the next 30 years. He used to say the lake saved his life because when the water was still enough, he could finally hear himself think again. Every summer growing up, I'd sit out on that dock beside him while he untangled fishing line with those thick scarred hands and told stories that never really sounded heroic, just honest. Stories about heat and fear and young men pretending not to be scared. The cabin smelled like cedar wood, old coffee, motor oil, and the kind of peace you can't buy anymore. When Dad passed away the previous winter, he left the place to me. Not because I was special. I think I was just the only one who understood what that cabin meant. I'd planned to retire there quietly, maybe fix boat motors for locals, maybe finally sleep through a full night without waking up at every little sound. Simple life. Small life. That was the goal. But Blackwater Lake wasn't small anymore. Somewhere around 2015, developers started buying up shoreline property and building these giant glass vacation homes that looked more like luxury hotels than lake houses. Suddenly, everybody talked about property values and community image like they were sacred scripture. And leading that whole transformation was Vanessa Holloway. Lord, even saying her name still irritates me a little. Vanessa moved into Blackwater with her husband Grant after he made a fortune building resort properties down in Florida. They bought the biggest house on the lake, tore down 3 original cabins to expand the lot, then spent the next year pretending they cared about preserving the community. Within 6 months, she became president of the Blackwater Shores Association, and after that, everything changed. People started getting violation notices over flower pots and mailbox colors. Old folks who'd lived there 40 years suddenly got fined because their docks looked dated. Veterans, retirees, widows didn't matter. If you didn't fit Vanessa's picture-perfect version of the lake, she wanted you gone. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until a week before my move. I was still packing boxes at my apartment in Knoxville when a certified envelope arrived, thick enough to stop a bullet. Blackwater Shores Association. Gold lettering. Expensive paper. Inside was a 12-page compliance notice informing me that my father's cabin failed to meet modern aesthetic expectations. They wanted new siding, landscaping upgrades, dock reconstruction, exterior repainting, window replacements, $23,000 worth of work before I could even occupy the property. I actually laughed at first because I thought it had to be a joke. Then I called the number at the bottom of the letter. Vanessa answered on the second ring. Smooth voice, the kind people use when they're smiling while sharpening a knife. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm glad you called. We've all been very concerned about that property." That property, like she was talking about an abandoned gas station instead of my father's home. I told her the cabin had been standing for over 50 years and survived storms that probably would have blown her mansion straight into the lake. She chuckled real soft and said, "Well, some things survive longer than they should." I still remember the silence after that sentence. The kind of silence where you suddenly realize the conversation isn't really about rules anymore. Then she hit me with it. Between us, she said, a developer has expressed interest in consolidating that section of shoreline. If you're overwhelmed by maintenance costs, perhaps selling would be smarter than fighting a losing battle. There it was. Finally honest. They didn't care about aesthetics. They wanted my land. My father's cabin sat right between two properties they already owned, and without mine, their investors couldn't complete some luxury marina expansion they'd been planning. I asked her one question before hanging up. What happens if I say no? And Vanessa, God, she laughed. Not loud. Worse than loud. Calm. Confident. Then, she said, we make living there impossible. The line went dead after that. And for a long time, I just stood there in my apartment staring at my father's old tackle box sitting beside the door, thinking about all those summers on Blackwater Lake, and realizing somebody had mistaken kindness for weakness. I wish I could tell you I handled that conversation like some calm old war hero. Truth is, I was furious. Not loud furious either. Which honestly is the dangerous kind. The kind that settles low in your chest and just sits there cooking slowly. By the time I reached Blackwater Lake the next morning, I already knew Vanessa Holloway wasn't bluffing. The moment my tires hit Lakeshore Drive, people started watching. Not curious watching, nervous watching. Like they'd seen this movie before and already knew how it ended. I stopped at a little bait shop near the marina to grab coffee, and the old guy behind the counter stared at my Tennessee plates before leaning closer and muttering, "You Mercer's boy?" I nodded. He glanced toward the window like he expected somebody to be listening. "Your daddy was a good man. Don't let those people run you off." Then he slid my coffee across the counter and refused to take my money. That told me everything I needed to know. Fear changes communities in weird ways. Folks stop talking loud. Stop asking questions. Stop looking each other in the eye too long. By noon, I'd already gotten my second warning. I was unloading furniture into the cabin when a county inspection truck pulled into the driveway. A young guy stepped out carrying a clipboard and wearing that uncomfortable expression bureaucrats get when they know they're doing dirty work for somebody richer than them. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "we received reports regarding unsafe structural conditions." Unsafe. Right. My father built that cabin like he expected God himself to inspect it someday. The beams were solid oak. The foundation sat on hand-cut limestone. That place survived tornado winds back in '98 that ripped roofs clean off half the county. But somehow now, suddenly, it was dangerous. The inspector walked around pretending to examine things while reading violations directly off a pre-printed sheet. Dock instability, electrical concerns, foundation shifting. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Then came the part that almost made me laugh. "You'll likely need an approved contractor," he said, handing me a business card. "Holloway Coastal Development. Grant Holloway's company." Imagine that coincidence. I looked at the card, then looked back at him. "You ever serve?" I asked. He blinked. "Excuse me. Military. You ever serve?" "No." "Then let me explain something. When somebody tries this hard to scare you before the fight even starts, it means they're already worried." The poor guy practically jogged back to his truck after that. But things got uglier fast. 2 days later, somebody cut the power line running to the cabin. I found it dangling near the tree line at sunset while standing there holding groceries that were already thawing in the summer heat. Then came anonymous noise complaints. Then fake trespassing reports. Twice deputies showed up because somebody claimed there was an armed, unstable veteran threatening residents. Both officers looked embarrassed before they even got out of the car. One of them quietly admitted Vanessa had filed 5 complaints against me in less than a week. 5. I hadn't even unpacked half my boxes yet. That night, I sat alone on the dock listening to frogs down near the reeds while thunder rolled somewhere far across the hills. The lake looked black under the moonlight, smooth as glass except where fish kept breaking the surface. I remember thinking how strange it was Overseas, at least you knew who the enemy was. Back home, everything wore a smile first. The next morning changed everything, though. I drove into town and spent 6 straight hours digging through county property records because something about Vanessa's obsession didn't make sense. Rich people don't wage full-scale war over one old cabin unless there's more money hiding underneath the story. Sure enough, there was. The clerk at the courthouse was this older woman named Irene Baxter who looked about 80 and moved slow enough to make you think she wasn't paying attention, but man, that woman caught everything. Around an hour, for she wandered over holding a folder thicker than a Bible and said, "Honey, you might want to look at this before somebody makes it disappear." Turns out my father and 11 other original property owners signed a shoreline agreement back in 1972. Old lake access rights, fishing easements, marina restrictions. Buried deep in the contract was one little clause that changed the entire game. Any major commercial development on the eastern shoreline required unanimous approval from all surviving founding families or their direct heirs, including me. I actually leaned back in that dusty courthouse chair and laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because suddenly everything made sense. Vanessa didn't hate my cabin. She needed my cabin. Without my signature, her luxury marina project was dead in the water. Millions of dollars, frozen because one stubborn old soldier inherited the wrong piece of land. Irene lowered her voice and said, "You know they've already bought 6 neighboring properties, right? How much money are we talking? Enough to ruin people." Well, that explained the desperation. On my way back to the lake, I noticed a black SUV following me for nearly 6 miles. Same vehicle stayed behind me through town, through the Marina Road, all the way to the cabin turnoff before finally peeling away. Little intimidation tactic. Problem was after Iraq, that kind of stuff barely even raises your pulse anymore. Later that evening, I got my first real ally. Her name was Eleanor Voss, retired litigation paralegal, 73 years old, sharp as broken glass. She knocked on my cabin door, carrying a peach cobbler and enough legal knowledge to dismantle half the county government. "Your father helped my husband after Vietnam," she said while setting the dish on the counter. Figured it was time somebody returned the favor. We talked for almost 3 hours. She explained how Vanessa and Grant had spent the last 4 years quietly forcing out longtime residents through fines, inspections, legal pressure, and buyouts. Elderly couples, fixed-income veterans, anybody sitting on desirable shoreline property. Most folks fold, Eleanor admitted softly. Not because they're weak, because fighting people with money gets exhausting. That sentence stuck with me. Fighting gets exhausting. She was right. Around midnight, after Eleanor left, I found myself walking through my father's old workshop carrying a flashlight because I couldn't sleep. The room still smelled like sawdust and machine oil. His tools hung exactly where he left them. Coffee mug still sitting beside the vice grip. Half-finished fishing lure on the workbench. I just stood there for a while in the dark thinking about how easy it would have been to sell the place and walk away. Simpler, cleaner, no war. Then my flashlight landed on an old framed photograph hanging near the back wall. Dad standing beside the cabin in 1971, shirt off, sunburned, grinning like the happiest man alive with a hammer tucked through his belt. And I swear to God, something about that picture made me angry all over again. Because people like Vanessa always think history belongs to whoever has the most money. Like regular families are temporary obstacles waiting to be bought out. I was still staring at that photo when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text message. Last chance to sell before things get unpleasant. No signature. Didn't need one. I looked around that workshop one more time, and my father's tools, his life, his peace, and finally texted back. "You should have left me alone." The crazy part is, after I sent that text, everything went quiet for almost 2 days. No inspectors, no sheriff calls, no anonymous complaints, just silence. And honestly, that silence bothered me more than the threats did. Because in the Army, whenever things suddenly got too quiet, it usually meant somebody was repositioning. Friday evening rolled around heavy and humid, the kind of Tennessee summer night where the air feels thick enough to drink. I was out on the dock tightening an old boat cleat when headlights started cutting through the trees. 3 trucks. Grant Holloway climbed out of the first one, wearing jeans so expensive they probably had financing options. 2 other men stepped out behind him, both built like nightclub bouncers pretending to be contractors. Grant smiled the second he saw me. "Logan," he said, hands spread wide like we were old friends. "Mind if we talk man to man?" I remember wiping my hands slowly on a rag and thinking, here it comes. He walked down the dock without waiting for permission, stopping maybe 6 feet away while lake water slapped softly against the pilings beneath us. "You've made this situation harder than it needed to be," he said. Calm voice. Controlled. But there was something twitchy underneath it now. Pressure. Investors probably breathing down his neck. Loans coming due. Men like Grant always look confident right up until money starts disappearing. "Your wife threatened me before I even moved in," I said. "Bit late for diplomacy." He chuckled. "Vanessa gets emotional sometimes." Emotional? That's one word for a woman who weaponized county offices like cruise missiles. Then he pulled out an envelope thick enough to choke a horse and held it toward me. "For $100,000, he said. "Cash settlement. You sign the shoreline release tonight. We wire the money Monday morning. You walk away rich. For $100,000. Truth is, for about half a second, my brain actually did the math. New truck. Quiet little place somewhere else. No heducks. No war. Then I looked past him toward the cabin, glowing warm through the pine trees, and remembered my father sitting on that porch teaching me how to tie fishing knots, because he said a man ought to know how to hold on to things properly. Funny what sticks with you. I shook my head. Grant sighed like I'd inconvenienced him personally. "You know," he muttered, "people around here are getting tired of your drama." "Funny," I replied. "Seems like the drama showed up with y'all." One of the guys behind him stepped forward after that, cracking his knuckles real loud like we were in some bad roadside bar movie. But before things could escalate, another set of headlights swept across the lake road. Eleanor's old Buick rolled into the driveway, followed by 3 more vehicles. Then 2 more behind those. Doors started opening everywhere. Neighbors. Luther Jennings carrying a flashlight and a shotgun he definitely wanted everybody to see. Old Mrs. Grady from across the cove. Tommy Reyes from the marina. Even a bait shop owner showed up holding coffee cups in a cardboard tray, like this was tailgate season. Grant's expression changed instantly. Bullies hate witnesses. Eleanor climbed out last, slow and steady, holding a thick stack of folders against her chest. "Evening, Grant," she called out sweet as church music. "We figured if y'all were having secret shoreline meetings again, maybe the community deserve an invitation." He looked at the growing crowd, then back at me, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Real uncertainty. That's when Eleanor dropped the bomb. "Oh, and before I forget," she said casually, "copies of your marina financing records were delivered to the State Attorney General's office this afternoon, along with the forged inspection requests, HOA kickback payments, and those delightful fake mental health complaints filed against Mr. Mercer." Dead silence. Even the frogs seemed to shut up for a second. Grant stared at her like somebody had punched him in the throat. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he finally snapped. Eleanor smiled. "Actually, sweetheart, I do. That's why I made copies." Things unraveled fast after that. Real fast. Turns out when rich people start panicking, they make sloppy mistakes. Within a week, state investigators arrived. Then federal environmental agents. Then IRS auditors. Every dirty little shortcut Grant and Vanessa used to build their empires started surfacing all at once. Shell companies. Illegal zoning deals. Fuzunhua asset men. Coerced property sales targeting elderly residents. Whole thing cracked open like rotten wood. Vanessa, tried fighting at first. God, she put on a performance too. Standing outside the courthouse in giant sunglasses talking about misunderstandings and political targeting. But the act collapsed the second financial records surfaced showing they'd been funneling HOA money straight into private development accounts. Folks around Blackwater Lake started talking again after that. Really talking. Stories poured out everywhere once people realized they weren't alone anymore. Retired couples threatened into selling. Veterans harassed with fake complaints. Widow women fined over nonsense until they gave up and left. Fear only works while everybody thinks they're isolated. That's the trick people like Vanessa count on. The final scene still feels unreal when I think about it. 3 months after that first day at the cabin, I stood out on the shoreline watching federal marshals tow away Grant Holloway's boats while reporters crowded the marina entrance. Vanessa was crying near the parking lot screaming at lawyers while deputies loaded boxes of seized documents into black SUVs. And me? I was sitting on my father's dock drinking coffee beside Eleanor while the sunrise spread across Blackwater Lake like melted gold. She nudged my shoulder and said, "Your daddy would have enjoyed this part." I laughed harder than I had in years. Not because revenge felt good, though honestly a little bit, yeah, but because the lake finally sounded like itself again. No fear, no politics, just water against wood, wine through the trees. Peace. Real peace. These days, the cabin's still standing exactly where it always was. I repair fishing boats out of my father's workshop now, same as I planned from the beginning. Some mornings I sit out on the dock before sunrise with coffee in one hand and his old tackle box beside me, thinking about how close I came to walking away from all of it. And sometimes I wonder how many communities across this country are dealing with the exact same thing right now. Regular people getting squeezed out by money, power, and folks who think they can bully history into disappearing. So now I want to ask you something honestly. If you were in my position, would you have taken the money and walked away, or stayed and fought even knowing it could turn your whole life upside down? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I guarantee this conversation is going to split people straight down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, corrupt officials, or somebody trying to push you out of a place your family built with their own hands, tell your story below. Trust me, you're probably not as alone as you think.